My name is Captain Amy Lawson, 27 years old, United States Army Special Forces. I've been trained for the most hostile situations imaginable, but nothing could have prepared me for the ambush on my own wedding day. The toast was about to happen when someone shouted, "Congratulations to the happy couple," and I saw my mother-in-law's hand hover over my champagne flute for just a second too long. My heart stopped. I saw the twitch in her fingers, saw something small drop from her palm into the bubbling liquid. She did it so smoothly, so casually, as if she were adjusting a napkin. But I caught it. I saw it all. As my mother-in-law Diane approached me in the reception hall of the Columbus Athletic Club, she smiled, a cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. She raised her own champagne flute, whispering just loud enough for me to hear, "Amy dear, you look so tense. Here, a little something to help you. Relax." She made one mistake. Before I tell you what that mistake was, let me know where you're from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe, because this is a story for anyone who's ever been deliberately brought down by a loved one on their happiest day. That mistake wasn't dropping the pill. It was assuming I wouldn't see it. The moment the tiny white object kissed the surface of the champagne, my world didn't just slow down. It froze. The cheerful melody from the string quartet warped into a low drone. The laughter and chatter of our guests at the Columbus Athletic Club became white noise, a distant hum on a frequency I could no longer process. Everything beyond a 3-foot radius of our head table blurred into an impressionist painting of white linen, blush pink flowers, and dark tuxedos. In the sharp, clear center of my vision, there were only 3 elements: me, Diane, and the 2 identical crystal flutes standing between us like chess pieces on a board. My training kicked in instantly, a reflex honed by years of discipline in environments where a moment's hesitation could be fatal. The emotional part of my brain, the bride, the new wife, was shoved into a locked room. The operator took over. A threat assessment protocol scrolled through my mind with the speed of a data stream. Threat assessment: unknown chemical agent. Most likely a benzodiazepine, given her earlier comments about me being tense. Intent: incapacitation. Environmental analysis: a target-rich environment, but no friendly awareness. 150 guests, all compromised by celebration. No active allies, not even my husband. Enemy objective: public humiliation, sabotage of a key life event, potential for induced physical harm via a fall or loss of consciousness. Reaction: window: seconds. The MC was already walking to the microphone to begin the toast. Any action had to be immediate, decisive, and covert. The feeling that washed over me wasn't fear. It was something far colder, far more chilling, a grim, weary familiarity. I had been here before. Not in a ballroom, not in a $1,000 wedding dress, but in dusty villages and tense urban centers where the smile of an adversary was the most dangerous weapon in the room. The uniform was different. The battlefield was decorated with silk and roses, but the fundamentals of the engagement were identical. This was an ambush. My gaze flickered to Ethan, my husband. He was glowing, radiating a pure, uncomplicated happiness that seemed to belong to another world. He caught my eye and gave me a quick, conspiratorial wink, a silent message of, "We did it," before turning to say something to his best man. He hadn't seen a thing. To him, this was just his mother, the elegant matriarch of the Davis family, leaning in to offer a kind word to her new daughter-in-law. He turned back to me, seeing my silence but misinterpreting it completely. He smiled, that warm, loving smile that had captured my heart. "See?" he whispered, squeezing my hand. "I told you she'd warm up to you. She's making an effort." That was the moment the real damage was done. His words were a secondary device, a psychological shrapnel charge that detonated long after the initial attack. The poison in the glass was a threat to my body, but his innocence was a direct assault on my soul. It was in that instant, with his hand in mine, that I understood the full tactical reality of my situation. I was completely, utterly alone. No backup, no overwatch. I was a one-woman fire team on a hostile objective. The realization didn't break me. It forged my resolve into something hard and sharp, like steel being quenched in ice water. I wasn't just going to survive this ambush, I was going to win. My mind cycled through countermeasures, discarding them as fast as they appeared. Option A. Knock over the glass. Bad move. It would create a scene, draw unwanted attention, and paint me as a clumsy, hysterical bride. Diane would play the victim to perfection, feigning shock and hurt. I'd be handing her the victory on a silver platter. Option B. Accuse her directly. Even worse. It would be my word, the word of the outsider, the country girl in a uniform, against hers. Against the respected Diane Davis, wife of a prominent Columbus surgeon, a pillar of the community. I would be the one to ruin my own wedding. No, both were amateur moves driven by emotion. And Special Forces operators are not amateurs. We aren't just taught to fight, we're taught to think. We're taught to see the battlefield for what it is, to identify the enemy's weaknesses and to use their own momentum against them. Diane's weakness was her arrogance, her absolute, unshakable belief that I was beneath her, less intelligent, less sophisticated, and utterly defenseless in her world of social warfare. She saw a bride in a white dress, not a captain who had graduated at the top of her class from Sears School. That was the mistake she had mentioned in her toast, the one she thought she knew. But her real mistake, the fatal one, was underestimating her target. The MC tapped the microphone. All right, everyone, if I could have your attention, let's get our glasses charged and ready for a toast to our wonderful bride and groom, Amy and Ethan. A rustle of movement filled the hall as people rose to their feet. This was my window. Diane, ever the performer, turned to flash a dazzling smile at a friend at a nearby table, basking in the spotlight. 1 second of inattention. That's all I needed. My left hand, still holding my bouquet of white peonies and eucalyptus, moved in a slow, natural arc toward the table. It was a casual, languid gesture, the kind of movement a bride might make to set her flowers down before a toast. Nothing about it was rushed. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. But beneath the cover of the bouquet, my right hand was already in motion. My fingers, trained to assemble a rifle in complete darkness, moved with a surgeon's precision. They closed around the base of her flute and my flute simultaneously. A single, fluid motion. A pivot, a swap, so seamless and silent that not a single drop of liquid sloshed. It took less than half a second. Ethan, standing right beside me, noticed nothing. When Diane turned back, her triumphant smile still in place, she reached for the glass that was now in front of her, the one that had been mine. I met her gaze across the table, my expression perfectly neutral. I raised my own glass, the one that had been hers just a moment ago. To us, Mother, I said, my voice clear and steady. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of confusion in her cold eyes. She didn't know what had just happened, but she would. The game was on. As I watched her raise that glass to her lips, her expression a mask of smug satisfaction, it wasn't just the pill I saw. I saw every single dose of poison she had tried to feed me over the last 2 years. The champagne in her hand was just the first time she'd tried to use actual chemicals. Her preferred weapon had always been words, delivered with a smile as cold and sharp as surgical steel. The memories flooded back, not as a gentle stream, but as a series of tactical snapshots, evidence in a long and undeclared war. It started the first time Ethan brought me home to meet his parents. We went to Lindy's, an upscale restaurant in Columbus's historic German village, the kind of place with white tablecloths and waiters who call you, ma'am. I wore a simple black dress, determined to make a good impression. For 2 hours, I was subjected to what felt less like a dinner and more like a polite interrogation. Diane leaned forward, her perfectly manicured hands steepled on the table, and questioned me about Special Forces selection as if she were a biologist studying a strange, exotic creature. So, they actually make you roll around in the mud? She'd asked, her voice dripping with a kind of fascinated disgust. My goodness, that's just dreadful. You must be very robust. She let the word robust hang in the air, making it sound like a clinical diagnosis for a farm animal. Then she turned to Ethan, placing a delicate hand on his arm. I just can't imagine a woman wanting to do those things. Can you, darling? She never said it outright, of course. She was too skilled for that. But the message was crystal clear, delivered with the precision of a sniper's bullet. I was an anomaly. An outsider who didn't belong in her civilized world of charity luncheons and country club galas. My strength, the very thing Ethan loved about me, the quality I'd forged through sweat and sacrifice, was being framed as something crude, unfeminine, and shameful. That first Christmas was a masterclass in psychological warfare. The Davis family exchanged lavish gifts in their beautifully decorated living room in Upper Arlington. Ethan's father, Gregory, got a vintage Rolex. His sister received a Louis Vuitton handbag. When it was my turn, Diane handed me a perfectly wrapped box with a large silk bow. I opened it to find a high-end gardening tool set and a hardcover book titled Rediscovering Your Feminine Grace. I just thought, she said, her voice oozing with faux benevolence, that you might appreciate something to help you reconnect with your softer side after everything you do. A blanket of silence fell over the room. I could feel the uncomfortable shifting of a dozen family members. Ethan looked mortified, his face flushing red, but he said nothing. I just smiled, a tight, practiced smile, and said, "Thank you, Diane. That's very thoughtful." But inside, something went cold and hard. It wasn't a gift. It was a judgment. It was a beautifully wrapped insult, designed to diminish me in front of the entire family. It was her way of saying, "You are not one of us. You are broken, and you need to be fixed." The attacks grew more strategic as Ethan and I got more serious. The fall after we met, the entire family had season tickets for the Ohio State Buckeyes games. It's a huge deal in Columbus. Saturdays in the fall are sacred. The week of the big rivalry game against Michigan, Diane called me. "Amy dear, we're all meeting at the stadium. Gregory has the tickets." When I got there, fighting through the massive crowds, the whole family was waiting. Diane greeted me with a look of theatrical distress. "Oh, Amy, I am so sorry. It seems Gregory completely forgot and only grabbed enough tickets for the family. They must have slipped his mind." She made it sound like a simple mistake, but the slight emphasis on the word family told me everything. While they went inside, I was left to stand alone outside Ohio Stadium, listening to the roar of 100,000 people, feeling like the loneliest person in the city. When Ethan and I finally announced our engagement, Diane escalated from covert slights to a full-blown campaign of sabotage. We'd find a caterer we loved. A week later, they'd call us, confused, saying Mrs. Davis had informed them we were reconsidering our options. She called our venue to suggest we might be postponing due to my unpredictable deployment schedule. The bridesmaid dress for my maid of honor, Sarah, my teammate, and my closest friend, was mysteriously lost in the mail after being delivered to the Davises' house. To Ethan, she whispered a constant stream of poison. He was making the biggest mistake of his life, she'd say. I would be deployed and abandon him. I would come back changed, or worse, I wouldn't come back at all. She played on his deepest fears, sowing seeds of doubt and insecurity, a slow-acting toxin designed to erode the foundation of our relationship from within. Finally, just last week, she dropped all pretense of subtlety. She asked to speak with me alone in the study of their home. She closed the heavy oak doors, and the mask of polite society fell away. "Little girl," she began, the words laced with a contempt she no longer bothered to hide. "You may have my son fooled, but you don't have me fooled. I know what you are. You're just a piece of trailer trash with a fancy title, trying to climb your way into a world where you don't belong." I stood my ground, my posture unchanged. "This wedding," she hissed, taking a step closer, "is not going to happen. Not if I can help it." That wasn't a microaggression. That wasn't a veiled insult. That was a declaration of war. I looked her straight in the eye, my voice as calm and steady as it would be in a mission briefing. "I'm not a little girl. I'm Captain Lawson, and this wedding is happening." In that moment, I knew. I knew she was past the point of petty games and psychological manipulation. She had been pushed into a corner, and like any cornered enemy, she would resort to more desperate, more dangerous measures. And I was right. I'm sure some of you listening know exactly what it feels like to have your greatest accomplishments twisted into something to be ashamed of. If you've ever had someone try to make you feel small so they could feel big, please support this story with a like, and in the comments, just type one word, underestimated. Because that's what they do. They underestimate us. As I stood there in my wedding dress, watching Diane bring that poisoned glass to her lips, I knew this wasn't just about a single act of malice. This was the culmination of a 2-year war on my identity, my worth, and my right to be loved for who I am. And her escalation was about to meet its counteroffensive. As Diane drank the last of her champagne, a silent clock started ticking in my head. I returned to my seat beside Ethan, smoothing the silk of my dress, my movements calm and measured. Outwardly, I was the picture of a serene bride. Inwardly, I was on high alert, running surveillance on my target. So, how would it happen? How does a woman like Diane Davis, a queen of meticulous control, finally lose it? For the first 20 minutes, nothing. She was flawless. She dabbed her lips with a linen napkin, engaged in polite conversation, and even made a cuttingly witty remark about the floral centerpieces being a touch ostentatious. She was so perfectly Diane that a sliver of doubt crept into my mind. Was the dosage too low? Had I miscalculated? A small, naive part of me, the part that still wanted a peaceful life, almost hoped I was wrong. Maybe it was just a vitamin she'd dropped. But then, I saw it. The first sign. As she reached for her water glass, her hand trembled, just a little. It was a micro-tremor, nearly invisible to the naked eye, but to me, it was as loud as a gunshot. A few minutes later, I noticed her eyes, which were usually sharp and focused like a hawk's, had begun to soften, to lose their predatory glint. The internal report was clear. Target is showing effects. I took a slow sip of my own water, keeping my heart rate steady. The observation phase was over. The action phase was about to begin. It started with a laugh. Not her usual throaty, controlled chuckle, but a loud, unrestrained giggle that cut through the polite dinner conversation. Everyone at the head table turned to look at her. Diane suddenly pushed her chair back and stood up, swaying slightly. "Oh, Amy," she slurred, her voice a good 2 octaves higher than normal. "I must say, you look just radiant in that uniform. No, wait, that lovely white dress." Ethan was on his feet in an instant, rushing to her side. "Mom, are you okay? Have you been drinking too much?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. Diane threw her arms around him, planting a series of wet, sloppy kisses on his cheek. "I've never been better, my darling boy," she declared. "I'm just so happy you married her." She gestured vaguely in my direction with a limp wrist. The plan, I realized, was for me to be the one slurring and stumbling, for Ethan to be rushing to my side, for everyone to see the soldier who couldn't hold her liquor. Instead, she had cast herself as the star in her own chaotic sideshow. From there, the escalation was rapid and spectacular. First, she kicked off her expensive Manolo Blahnik heels, sending one of them skittering across the polished dance floor. "These things are killing me," she announced to no one in particular. Then, humming loudly off-key, she began to perform a strange, shuffling dance by herself next to the table. Her husband, Gregory, tried to intervene, putting a hand on her arm. "Diane, for God's sake, sit down. You're making a scene." She swatted his hand away. "Don't be a party pooper, Greg," she yelled. Then, as if drawn by a magnetic force, she began a wobbly, determined march toward the stage where the wedding band was playing a soft jazz number. She grabbed the microphone right out of the startled singer's hand. "I have an announcement to make," she bellowed into the mic, causing a screech of feedback. The entire reception hall fell silent. 150 pairs of eyes were fixed on her. "I want to confess something," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She pointed a wavering finger directly at me. "I have never liked that girl. Not one bit." A collective gasp went through the room. Ethan's face was pale with horror. But now, she continued, her face breaking into a wide, nonsensical grin. Now, I think I love her, so I'd like to dedicate a song to my new daughter. Before anyone could stop her, she launched into a screeching, painfully off-key rendition of Gloria Gaynor's I Will Survive. She mangled the lyrics, forgot the melody, and shouted the chorus with the raw power of a wounded animal. It was a train wreck, a beautiful, glorious, 5-star train wreck. But the grand finale was yet to come. As the band watched in stunned silence, Diane, still clutching the microphone, spotted the wedding cake. It was a magnificent 3-tiered creation, a testament to a baker's artistry. To Diane, it was apparently a mountain to be conquered. She staggered over to it and, with a surprising amount of drugged agility, hoisted herself onto the table. There she stood, swaying precariously on the linen, a mad queen on her collapsing throne, still wailing into the microphone. It was in that moment that she decided to deliver the line that revealed everything. She paused her singing, pointed at me again, her eyes wild. "You see," she screamed, her voice cracking, "my son loves me more. He will never choose someone like you over me." And then, disaster struck. Her ankle turned, her balance gave. There was a moment of suspended animation, her arms flailing, and then a tremendous crash. Diane came down, bringing the entire wedding cake with her. She landed in a heap of white frosting, crushed sugar flowers, and shattered dreams. Her Oscar de la Renta dress was smeared with vanilla buttercream. She just sat there, in the middle of the wreckage, her eyes wide and completely vacant, a single sugar peony stuck in her perfectly coiffed hair. Total system failure. It was Ethan and Gregory who finally managed to pull her out of the debris. As they half-dragged, half-carried her toward the exit, her dignity in tatters, she managed one last act of defiance. She turned back to the stunned crowd, gave a limp, royal wave, and blew a kiss. Diane Davis's meticulously planned shock and awe campaign had ended not with a bang, but with a splat. And she had been her own first and only casualty. The engagement was over. Now it was time to secure the evidence. The moment the doors of the Columbus Athletic Club swung shut behind Diane, a strange quiet fell over the reception hall. The band had stopped playing. The guests stood in awkward clusters, whispering amongst themselves, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. The chaos had subsided, but the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. I didn't waste a single second. My eyes scanned the room, bypassing the confused faces, and locked onto Sergeant Sarah Miller, my maid of honor, my teammate. She was already looking at me, her expression calm and ready. We didn't need words. We had shared freezing nights in observation posts and tense patrols through hostile territory. A simple glance was enough to communicate entire paragraphs of intent. I gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She understood. "Miller," I said, my voice low and steady as I walked toward her. "Secure the scene." "Roger that, Captain," she replied without hesitation. She didn't ask why. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't doubt. She just acted. While my new family was reeling and my guests were gossiping, Sarah moved with the quiet efficiency of a trained professional. She walked over to the now empty head table, pulled a clean linen napkin from an adjacent place setting, and carefully, deliberately, picked up the champagne flute Diane had used. She handled it like it was a piece of unexploded ordnance, holding it by the stem, her fingers ensuring no prints were smudged. In a room full of chaos, her professionalism was a lighthouse. Just then, Ethan returned to my side, his face ashen. He ran a hand through his hair, looking completely lost. "Amy. My God. I don't understand what just happened. Maybe she mixed her medications. Or maybe someone played a horrible prank on her. She hasn't been herself lately, with all the stress of the wedding." He was scrambling, his mind desperately trying to build a narrative that made sense, a story that didn't force him to confront the monstrous truth of what he'd just witnessed. I looked him straight in the eye. I owed him the truth, not a comforting lie. "Ethan, this wasn't an accident. I said, my voice devoid of emotion. It was a field report, not a confession. Before the toast, I saw your mother put something in my glass. I switched them. What you just saw was the direct result of her own actions. I watched his face as he processed my words. I saw the initial shock, followed by a wave of disbelief. His brow furrowed, his eyes searching mine for some sign that I was joking, or hysterical, or mistaken. "What are you saying?" he stammered, shaking his head. "My mother. She would never." "Amy, that's a crazy thing to say." He didn't finish his sentence, but he didn't have to. The accusation was hanging in the air between us, thick and suffocating. He didn't believe me. After everything Diane had done, after the 2-year campaign of subtle and not-so-subtle hostility, his first instinct was to defend her and doubt me. A small cold crack appeared in the foundation of our brand-new marriage. His father, Gregory, strode over, his face a mask of controlled fury. His phone buzzed. It was the hospital. "They're taking her to Mount Carmel East," he announced curtly. "We need to go. Now." As we prepared to leave, the wedding reception effectively over, Sarah intercepted me near the door. She pressed a small zip-top bag into my hand. Inside, the flute was carefully wrapped in the napkin. "Evidence is preserved, Captain," she said quietly. Then she placed a firm, grounding hand on my shoulder. Her gaze was unwavering. "Whatever happens next, I've got your 6. I saw the way she was looking at you all day. I believe you." Those 3 words, "I believe you," hit me with the force of a physical blow. They were the words I was silently begging to hear from my husband, the man who had just vowed to love and protect me. But they came from my sister in arms instead. In that moment, the warmth of her unwavering loyalty and the icy chill of Ethan's doubt created a painful, jarring contrast in my heart. One person represented the family I had chosen, forged in loyalty and trust. The other represented the family I'd married into, built on a foundation of secrets and denial. The drive to the hospital was excruciating. The silence in Ethan's Lexus was heavier and more damning than any argument could have been. I sat in the passenger seat, still wearing my ridiculous white wedding dress, which now felt like a costume from a play that had ended in tragedy. Ethan gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. He kept muttering to himself, building his wall of denial brick by brick. "It has to be a mistake. She's been under so much pressure. Maybe someone did spike her drink. A guest, maybe, as a joke." He was talking to himself, not to me. He was constructing a reality he could live with, a world where his mother wasn't a monster and his wife wasn't a liar. He was choosing blissful ignorance over the hard, ugly truth. I stared out the window at the passing lights of downtown Columbus, the sterile interior of the car feeling more like a cage. I realized then that my battle wasn't just with Diane. In a way, she was the easy part. She was a clearly identified enemy with predictable tactics. The real war, the much harder and more painful one, would be against the lifetime of manipulation that had been woven into the man sitting next to me. It would be a battle to tear down the wall he was so desperately building, to force him to see what was right in front of him, and to make him choose. Blind loyalty to the toxic past he came from, or a future built on truth with me. And I had no idea which side he would take. The emergency room waiting area at Mount Carmel East was its own kind of battlefield. The air was thick with the sterile smell of antiseptic and the low hum of human anxiety. Fluorescent lights beat down on the scuffed linoleum floors, casting a harsh, unforgiving glare on everyone. Still in my wedding dress, I felt profoundly out of place, a ghost from a happier reality that had imploded just hours before. Gregory was pacing back and forth like a caged tiger, his expensive suit now rumpled, his face a mask of fury, not concern. When he saw Ethan and me walk through the automatic doors, he marched straight toward us. He completely ignored his son and fixed his eyes on me. "What did you do to my wife?" he snarled, his voice a low growl. I kept my posture straight, my chin up. I would not cower. "Mr. Davis, I did nothing," I replied, my voice calm and professional. "She is a victim of her own actions." Gregory let out a short, ugly laugh. "Oh, I'm sure. A soldier like you, a Green Beret." I'm sure you know all sorts of ways to hurt someone without leaving a trace. His accusation was a poisoned dart, meant to paint me as some kind of covert assassin. This was their strategy. If you can't win on facts, attack the character of your opponent. Ethan quickly stepped between us. Dad, stop it. Don't talk to her like that. For a fleeting second, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe he would stand up for me. But then he turned to me, and the hope died in my throat. His next words hurt more than anything Gregory could have said. Amy, he began, his voice pleading, his eyes begging me to make this all go away. Maybe you should just tell them what happened. Maybe there was a misunderstanding of some kind. You were the one standing closest to her when she started acting strange. The implication was as clear as it was devastating. He was negotiating. He was asking me to offer up a confession, any confession, to appease his father and restore the family's twisted sense of peace. He wasn't on my side. He was trying to be a mediator in a war where I was the only one who had been shot at. In that moment, under the cold, sterile lights of the ER, I felt the crack in my heart widen into a chasm. The man who had placed a ring on my finger less than 3 hours ago was now siding with my accusers. Before I could respond, a woman in blue scrubs with a tired but competent face appeared. The Davis family, she said. Her name tag read Dr. Lewis. Please, come with me. She led the three of us into a small windowless consultation room. The air was stale. Sarah, who had followed us in her own car, stood quietly by the door, a silent sentinel. Dr. Lewis got straight to the point. We've run a full toxicology screen on Mrs. Davis, she said, looking at a chart in her hand. Her blood contains a dangerously high concentration of lorazepam. This is not a therapeutic dose. It's an overdose. Based on the levels, we have reason to believe this was a deliberate poisoning. Gregory's head snapped up. He pointed a finger at me. It was her. Ask her. She's the one who did this. Dr. Lewis's gaze shifted to me. Her eyes were professional, but assessing, searching. I was surrounded, outflanked, and taking fire from my own side. There was no one to fight this battle for me. I took a deep breath, the way I do before stepping out of a helicopter. The bride was gone. Captain Lawson was reporting for duty. Doctor, I began, my voice even, without a tremor. I was the intended target of this attack. The room went completely silent. I laid out the facts concisely, accurately, and without emotion, as if I were delivering an after-action report. I described Diane's words. I described seeing her hand over my glass, the drop of the pill. And I described my decision to switch the flutes. As I spoke, I watched their faces. Gregory looked stunned into silence. Ethan wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at his hands, which were clenched into tight fists in his lap. When I finished, the silence was absolute. Dr. Lewis looked from me, to Gregory, to Ethan, processing the information. Then I delivered the final piece of my report. And I have the evidence. I gave a slight nod toward the door. Sarah, ever vigilant, understood the cue. She stepped into the room, holding the zip-top bag containing the champagne flute. She placed it carefully on the small table in the center of the room. The evidence has been preserved, Doctor, Sarah said, her voice firm and clear. Dr. Lewis stared at the bag. She looked at the glass inside, then she looked back up at me. I could see the shift in her eyes. The professional skepticism was melting away, replaced by a look of dawning, horrified understanding. The truth, it turned out, had its own weapon. And I had just put it on the table. Have you ever been in a situation where the one person who was supposed to have your back was the first one to doubt you? It's a pain that cuts deeper than any insult from an enemy. If you know that feeling, hit the like button for every single person who's had to fight a battle alone. And in the comments, just write 2 words. I understand. In that sterile, quiet room, a new war had just begun. And the first casualty was the naive belief that the vows we had taken just hours before were strong enough to withstand the corrosive power of family secrets. The next day, a call from Dr. Lewis confirmed what I already knew. The hospital's official lab results were back. The crime lab analysis of the champagne flute I'd provided was definitive. It contained a significant concentration of lorazepam. a powerful sedative in the benzodiazepine family. The physical evidence was a perfect match for my testimony. It wasn't a theory anymore. It wasn't an accusation. It was a fact, printed in black and white on a hospital report. Undeniable. I was sitting with Ethan on the floor of our new apartment in the Short North District. We were surrounded by unpacked boxes, monuments to a future that suddenly felt fragile and uncertain. This was supposed to be our first full day as husband and wife, a day for lazy brunch and opening gifts. Instead, it was a day of reckoning. He sat across from me, his face etched with exhaustion and conflict, still trying to find a path that didn't lead to total implosion. "Amy, look," he began, his voice barely a whisper, as if a louder volume would make the nightmare more real. "Now we know. The tests prove it. It's real. Mom, she needs help. Serious, professional help. We'll get her into a program, a facility, whatever it takes. I'll make sure of it. But now that we have the facts, now that we know you were right, can we just handle this as a family? Can we let this go? For me? For us?" I stared at him, a cold, heavy feeling spreading through my chest. He still didn't get it. He was looking at an act of premeditated criminal assault and calling it a cry for help. In his world, the family unit, no matter how toxic, was an institution to be protected at all costs. Anything that happened within its walls was a private matter, a shameful secret to be managed and concealed. But in my world, actions have consequences. A crime is a crime, whether it happens in an alleyway or at a wedding reception. "Let it go," I repeated. The words felt alien on my tongue. My voice was quiet, stripped of all warmth, leaving only an icy calm. "You want me to let go of the fact that your mother deliberately tried to drug me on our wedding day? Ethan, this wasn't some harmless prank. This was calculated. Think about what she wanted to happen. She wanted me drugged, incapacitated. She wanted you, my husband, to see me slurring my words, stumbling, collapsing. She wanted to humiliate me in front of my friends, my colleagues, and your entire family. What do you think would have happened if I wasn't trained to recognize a threat? If I was just a normal bride, overwhelmed and trusting? I could have fallen and hit my head. I could have become seriously ill. At best, she wanted to destroy my reputation and my happiest day. At worst, she was completely indifferent to my physical safety. That is not a mistake, Ethan. That was an attack." I watched the desperation claw at his features. He was a man being torn in two, caught between the woman he loved and the mother who had programmed him. "But it's my mother, Amy," he pleaded, his voice cracking, the sound of a man breaking apart. "My own mother. You can't press charges against her. You can't call the police. Families don't do that to each other." And that was it. That was the line. The final tripwire. The single sentence that detonated every last bit of silent endurance, every ounce of polite patience I had painstakingly maintained for 2 long years. The dam of my composure, built with the discipline and steel of my training, didn't just crack under the pressure. It was obliterated. I rose to my feet in a single, fluid motion. It wasn't aggressive, but it was decisive. It was final. I stood over the man I had married, the man I loved with all my heart, and the carefully constructed illusion I had held of him. The illusion of him as my partner, my equal, my defender in all things, crumbled into dust at my feet. I was looking at a stranger. "A family doesn't poison each other on their wedding day either," I said, my voice now as hard and unforgiving as granite. "It seems we have a fundamental disagreement on the definition of family, Ethan. In my world, in the Army, we have a code. It's not complicated. You never, ever leave a soldier behind. You provide cover fire, you protect your flank, you stand your ground together. Last night, in that hospital, when I was surrounded and taking fire from all sides, when I needed my partner more than I have ever needed anyone in my life, you didn't have my back. You didn't provide cover. You stood down. You left me behind to protect the very person who launched the attack." I took a deep, steadying breath, letting the full weight of my words settle in the suffocating silence of the room, amidst the ghosts of our future. "My silence is over," I stated, each word a vow. a new oath to myself. I will not be the keeper of your family's dirty secrets. I will not enable this sickness by pretending it didn't happen. I will not let this be swept under the rug. I am pressing charges. Ethan's face went through a rapid, painful series of transformations, from pleading to disbelief to raw, naked panic. He finally, truly understood. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a statement of intent, an operational directive. "You can't," he stammered, scrambling to his feet. He looked like a frightened boy, not the man I married. "Amy, you can't do that. It will destroy my family, the scandal, my father's reputation." I walked to the door of our new, empty home, my hand resting on the cool, unfeeling metal of the doorknob. I turned back to look at him one last time, my heart aching with a grief so profound it felt like a physical wound. "Your family was already destroyed, Ethan, long before I ever came into the picture. What happened last night was just a symptom of a disease that has been festering for decades. The question now is about our family. This one. The one that's supposed to start right here, in this room. Is it going to be built on truth, integrity, and mutual defense? Or is it going to be built on a foundation of lies and poison?" I let the question hang in the air, a life-altering ultimatum. You have a wife who was assaulted, or you have a mother who committed that assault. You can have one, or you can have the other. But you cannot have both. You can't stand in the middle of this battlefield and pretend to be a neutral party. You have to pick a side. You choose, Ethan. And with that, I opened the door and walked out into the hallway, leaving him alone in the wreckage of our wedding day, faced with a choice that would define not just his future, but the very essence of the man he was going to be. I didn't wait for Ethan's choice. My ultimatum wasn't a request for his permission. It was a declaration of my own independence. The next morning, I acted. Through a friend in the Judge Advocate General's Corps, the Army's legal arm, I got a recommendation. By 10 a.m., I was sitting in a leather chair in a high-rise office downtown, across a large mahogany desk from a woman named Patricia Walsh. She was a former prosecutor with a reputation for being as tough as a coffin nail and twice as sharp. She had a no-nonsense air about her graying hair cut in a severe bob, her eyes missing nothing. I was physically and emotionally exhausted, but my mind was crystal clear. I laid out the entire situation for her, from the first dinner at Lindy's to the text message from Diane. I presented it like a mission briefing, chronologically, factually, and without emotional embellishment. I handed her the police report number I'd filed online that morning and the contact information for Dr. Lewis at the hospital. Patricia listened intently, her face unreadable, never interrupting. She made a few notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, the leather groaning in protest. She steepled her fingers and stared at me for a long, silent moment. "Captain Lawson," she said finally, her voice low and firm. "In 20 years as a prosecutor and a defense attorney, I've seen some truly awful family dynamics. But this is in a different league entirely. What your mother-in-law did is not a family squabble. It's not a misunderstanding. Under Ohio law, it's felonious assault, second degree. We're not just going to file a complaint, we're going to prosecute." Hearing those words, felonious assault, from a legal professional was a profound validation. For the first time in 48 hours, I felt like I wasn't fighting alone. I had a powerful new ally. As I was driving back to the apartment, my phone started buzzing relentlessly. It was Sarah. "Amy, you need to see this, now." She sent me a link. I pulled over into a parking lot, my curiosity piqued. I clicked the link. It took me to YouTube. The video was shaky, clearly filmed on a cell phone by a guest, and the audio was slightly distorted by the background noise. But the content was unmistakable. It was the whole thing. The entire, unedited meltdown of Diane Davis. It started with her slurred speech on the stage, the off-key caterwauling of "I will survive," her unhinged confession about not liking me, and culminated in the glorious, cake-destroying final act. Someone had titled it simply, "Mother-in-law's Wild Meltdown at Columbus Wedding." It already had over 50,000 views. Someone, some anonymous guest at my wedding, had just deployed a tactical nuke into the middle of my legal battle. They had launched a second front in this war, a weapon I didn't even know I had. The fight was no longer confined to the quiet, methodical world of the justice system. It had just gone public. It had gone viral. The media firestorm was immediate and intense. By early afternoon, the story had been picked up by the local news blogs. By evening, it was the lead story on 10 TV News and was featured on the homepage of the Columbus Dispatch. Diane Davis wasn't just some random woman. She was a prominent socialite, a board member for several high-profile charities, the wife of a renowned surgeon. Her name and face were instantly recognizable to thousands of people in the city. The comments section under the YouTube video was a digital firing squad. Thousands of comments poured in, a torrent of ridicule, condemnation, and amateur psychological diagnoses. The carefully constructed lifelong facade of Diane Davis, the epitome of grace and class, was being dismantled and incinerated in real time by an army of anonymous strangers on the internet. Late that afternoon, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered. It was Gregory. His voice, usually so booming and arrogant, was now thin and reedy with panic. "You have to do something," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "You have to make them take that video down. Call the police, call your lawyer, withdraw the complaint. Diane, she's a wreck. She won't come out of her room. You're destroying us. You're destroying this family." I held the phone to my ear, listening to his frantic, self-pitying rant. When he was done, my reply was cold and simple. "I didn't do this, Gregory. You all did this to yourselves." Then I hung up. That evening, Ethan came home. He looked like a man who had walked through fire. The doubt, the denial, the desperate need to believe in a comfortable lie, it was all gone, burned away. All that was left was a hollowed-out look of shame and horror. He had seen the video. He had read the news articles. He had scrolled through the thousands of comments from strangers who saw his mother's behavior with a clarity he had never allowed himself to have. For the first time, he had seen his family not through the fog of lifelong conditioning, but through the unforgiving lens of the outside world. "I'm sorry, Amy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He couldn't even look at me. "God, I am so sorry. I was so blind. I was a coward. I didn't protect you." He was silent for a moment, then he slowly held out his phone. "She sent me this an hour ago." I took the phone. On the screen was a text message from Diane. It read, "It was a setup. That little bitch set me up. She switched the glasses. I'll make her pay for what she's done to me." And there it was, the smoking gun. Not just an admission that she knew the glass was drugged, but a complete lack of remorse and a direct threat. It was the final piece of the puzzle, the key that unlocked the last door of his denial. Finally, the fog in Ethan's mind cleared. He looked up at me, his eyes now steady and resolute, the eyes of the man I had first fallen in love with. "What do you need me to do?" Ethan's question, "What do you need me to do?" changed everything. The answer was simple. Tell the truth. Armed with Diane's incriminating text message, which Ethan forwarded to my lawyer, Patricia Walsh took charge. The wheels of justice, which often seemed to grind slowly, began to turn with surprising speed. The Columbus Police Department opened a formal investigation. A few days later, it happened. The local news channels cut into their afternoon programming with breaking news. There she was, on live television. Diane Davis, being escorted out of her multi-million-dollar home in Upper Arlington. She was wearing a silk pajama set and trying desperately to maintain an air of aristocratic indignation. But there was no hiding the cold, hard steel of the handcuffs clasped behind her back. Seeing that image wasn't a moment of triumphant joy for me. It was a somber, bitter confirmation that the situation had escalated beyond any hope of a quiet resolution. The war was no longer being fought in whispers and shadows. It was now official. The preliminary hearing was a circus. Diane arrived at the Franklin County Municipal Court with a team of 3 high-priced lawyers who looked like they'd stepped out of a TV show. Their strategy was clear from the start. Paint Diane as the victim. She was suffering from a temporary mental health crisis, they argued. She had been provoked by the stress of the wedding and my supposed hostility. But the young, sharp prosecutor assigned to the case dismantled their narrative piece by piece. She presented the evidence in a calm, methodical, and damning sequence. First, the toxicology report from Mount Carmel East. Then, the crime lab analysis of the champagne flute. Then, a sworn affidavit from Dr. Lewis. And then came the prosecution's two trump cards. She played the viral YouTube video for the entire courtroom, the scratchy audio of Diane's screeching voice filling the tense silence. Finally, she displayed Diane's text message to Ethan on the overhead screens, calling it the smoking gun. This text, the prosecutor argued, pointing to the screen, shows not only a clear knowledge of the crime, but a complete lack of remorse, a continued threat, and a textbook consciousness of guilt. When the judge gave Diane a chance to speak, her lawyers practically begged her to remain silent. She ignored them. Consumed by her own rage, she stood up and unleashed a venomous tirade, not at the judge, but at me. She called me a liar, a schemer, a backwater nobody, who had orchestrated the whole thing to ruin her family. In her desperate attempt to attack my character, she inadvertently confessed to the entire motive, her deep-seated hatred for me, in open court. The judge listened patiently, his face grim. When she was finished, he simply said, "Bail is set at $50,000. This case will proceed to trial." The trial took place 8 weeks later. 8 weeks of sleepless nights and endless meetings with lawyers. Ethan was by my side through it all. He wasn't the wavering, uncertain man from our wedding night anymore. He was steady, resolute, and filled with a quiet determination to see justice done. The most critical moment of the trial came when the prosecution called Ethan to the stand. He walked to the witness box, his steps heavy. He was sworn in, and for the first time, he looked at his mother, who was sitting at the defendant's table, looking small and pale. He wouldn't meet her gaze. His voice was low and trembled slightly at first, but it grew stronger as he spoke. He told the jury everything, starting from the beginning. He talked about his initial blindness, his desperate attempts to believe his mother was innocent, his doubt of me in the hospital. "I didn't believe my wife," he said, his voice thick with a regret that was almost tangible. He finally looked at me, his eyes full of sorrow. "And that is the single greatest mistake of my life. I was a coward. I chose to believe a comfortable lie instead of an uncomfortable truth. My mother, driven by a hatred I still can't fully comprehend, tried to destroy the woman I love on the happiest day of our lives. She tried to poison my wife, and for a few terrible hours, I let her poison my mind as well." His testimony was devastating. It was the nail in the coffin. A son testifying against his own mother, not out of malice, but out of a painful, hard-won allegiance to the truth. When he stepped down from the stand, he walked back to his seat and took my hand. His grip was firm, unwavering. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they filed back into the jury box, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears. The foreman, a middle-aged man with a weary face, handed a piece of paper to the bailiff. The judge read it, his expression unchanging. "On the charge of felonious assault in the second degree, how do you find the defendant, Diane Davis?" The foreman stood. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty." A strangled sob escaped from Gregory. Diane just slumped in her chair, all the fight gone out of her, her face a blank, empty mask. I felt Ethan's hand tighten around mine. There was no cheer of victory from our side, no triumphant fist pump. There was only a profound, heavy, all-encompassing sense of release. The weight that I had been carrying for 2 years, the burden of being disbelieved, undermined, and attacked, was finally lifted. Justice had been served. The truth had been heard. The battle was over. Winning a war doesn't feel the way it does in the movies. There's no triumphant music, no cheering crowds. There's only the ringing silence after the last shot has been fired. That's what the guilty verdict felt like, a profound, echoing silence. A few weeks later, we were back in the same courtroom for the sentencing. Diane was brought in wearing a drab prison jumpsuit, a stark contrast to the designer labels she used to wear like armor. She looked smaller, depleted, stripped of all her former arrogance. The judge looked down at her from his bench, his expression stern. "Mrs. Davis," he said, his voice resonating with authority, "your actions were not just a crime against the state. They were a betrayal of one of the most sacred relationships in human society, that of a mother to her child's chosen partner. Your utter lack of remorse throughout these proceedings is frankly alarming." He sentenced her to 3 years in state prison and ordered her to pay full restitution for the cost of the wedding she had destroyed. As the bailiffs led her away, she didn't look at us. She didn't look at anyone. The carefully constructed world of Diane Davis had completely and irrevocably collapsed. I felt no joy watching her go. I felt no satisfaction. I just felt a deep, hollow emptiness. The kind a soldier feels when the battle is over and all that's left is to survey the wreckage. In the weeks that followed, a strange quiet descended upon our lives. We existed in a sort of limbo, the storm having passed but the landscape forever changed. One afternoon, Ethan came home from checking the mail at his parents' house. He was holding a single, cream-colored envelope. He read the letter inside in silence, his expression slowly hardening, darkening with a sad finality. Without a word, he handed it to me. It was from Gregory. It was not an apology. It was an indictment. He accused me of deliberately provoking Diane, of being a gold digger who had schemed to tear his family apart from the beginning. He accused Ethan of being a traitor, of betraying his own blood. He ended the letter with a single, brutal sentence. "You two have destroyed everything. Don't ever contact me again." I read the words, filled with so much hatred and denial, and I felt an unexpected sense of clarity. That letter, in its own twisted way, was a gift. It was the final piece of evidence, the last nail in the coffin of Ethan's old life. It cauterized any lingering wounds of doubt or guilt he might have had. It was proof that this was not a family that could be fixed, because they didn't even believe they were broken. He looked at me, his eyes clear and resolved. "He made his choice," Ethan said quietly. "Now we get to make ours." I never went to visit Diane in prison. I had no desire to see her, no words left to say. But in the quiet of my own mind, I held one final meeting with her. I pictured myself sitting across from her in a sterile visitor's room, not in a wedding dress or a uniform, but just as myself. And in that silent conversation, I told her that I forgave her. It wasn't for her. It had nothing to do with whether she deserved it. I forgave her for me. I deserved peace. I deserved to live a life free from the corrosive weight of anger and resentment. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't about condoning what someone did. It's not about reconciliation. It's about remembering what happened, but choosing not to use your right to retaliate. It's about taking the power back. I forgave her to release myself from the chains of her hatred, to declare that her poison would have no more power over my life, my marriage, or my future. After that imaginary conversation, I felt a weight I didn't even know I was still carrying lift from my shoulders. A few nights later, Ethan and I finally sat down to talk about the future. We both knew we couldn't stay in Columbus. Every street corner, every restaurant, held a memory now tainted by the events of the last few months. The city itself felt like a battlefield, haunted by ghosts. "I think we need a new deployment, Captain," Ethan said. It was the first time he had used my rank like that. Not with reverence, but with a gentle, knowing humor. A small smile touched his lips. "A new duty station. Somewhere we can build a new base of operations, from the ground up." I smiled back, a real, genuine smile. "I agree, civilian," I said, the playful jab feeling like a step toward our new normal. The decision to leave wasn't about running away. It was a strategic relocation. It was a deliberate act of self-preservation, of choosing our own well-being over a geography of pain. We wouldn't erase the past. It was part of our story now. A scar that proved we had survived something terrible, but we would not let it define our future. The war with the Davis family was over. Gregory had drawn the final boundary line with his letter. Ethan and I had chosen our own family, our own unit of 2, and it was time to build our fortress somewhere new. Our new duty station was Denver, Colorado. We chose it for the mountains. There's something about the sheer, unwavering presence of the Rockies that makes you feel grounded, that puts your own troubles into perspective. They are ancient and steadfast, a silent testament to the power of enduring. We bought a small house with a clear view of them, and every morning I'd watch the sunrise paint their peaks in shades of pink and gold. We started over. It was a strategic redeployment of our lives. Ethan left his job at the large corporate firm in Columbus and started his own small architectural practice, specializing in sustainable, environmentally friendly design. He poured his heart into creating homes that were in harmony with their surroundings, not in conflict with them. When my enlistment contract was up for renewal, I made the difficult decision not to re-enlist. My time in the service had forged me, given me skills that had saved my life in more ways than one. But that chapter was over. Instead, I took a position with a nonprofit organization that helps veterans transition back into civilian life, using my experiences to guide others through the often difficult journey of finding a new purpose. We had left the old battlefields behind, not to forget them, but to build a new forward operating base on our own terms, on our own territory. Healing, I learned, is not a linear process. It's not a mission with a clear objective and an end date. It's more like reconnaissance. You move forward, sometimes you have to fall back, and you learn the terrain of your own heart one step at a time. There were days, especially in the first year, when a memory would surface like a ghost. The glint of Diane's eyes, the cold dread in the ER, the look of doubt on Ethan's face. But now, the difference was that Ethan was there. He learned to listen, truly listen, not with the aim of fixing a problem, but simply to be present, to bear witness to my pain without trying to explain it away. He learned that his quiet presence was more powerful than any apology. We learned together that true strength isn't about never being afraid or hurt. It's about having the courage to face those fears together, as a single, unified team. Our marriage, forged in the crucible of that horrific wedding night, had been stress-tested to its absolute limits. What emerged from the fire wasn't scarred or weakened, but tempered. It was stronger, more resilient, and more honest than anything we had before. We were no longer just two individuals in love. We had become a unit. 5 years passed. One bright Saturday afternoon in late summer, I was sitting on a checkered blanket in Washington Park, the sun warm on my face. A few feet away, Ethan was chasing our 4-year-old daughter, a tiny whirlwind of joyful energy named Sarah. We named her after the most loyal person I've ever known. She had Ethan's kind, gentle eyes and, I like to think, my fearless laugh. Ethan scooped her up, swung her into the air, and she let out a shriek of pure, unadulterated delight. The sound was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. He walked over and sat down on the blanket beside me, pulling me close as little Sarah ran off to investigate a particularly interesting dandelion. He was quiet for a long moment, just watching her. Then he turned to me, his expression soft and full of a love that still sometimes took my breath away. "You know," he said softly, "you taught me that loyalty isn't a default setting. It's not something you're just born into. It's a choice. It's a conscious decision you have to make every single day." He reached out and tucked a piece of my hair behind my ear. "And I choose you, Amy, every day. Always." Those words, spoken so simply and sincerely in the afternoon sun, were the most sacred vow I had ever heard. They were our true wedding vows, rewritten not in a church, but in the quiet moments of a life we had built together. Sometimes I think back to that moment in the reception hall, the moment I switched the 2 champagne glasses. It wasn't an act of revenge. Revenge is a hot, emotional, messy thing. My action was cold, precise, and logical. It was an act of self-preservation, a tactical decision made to survive an ambush. Diane's downfall wasn't my objective. It was simply the unavoidable consequence of her own hatred. The justice system did what it was designed to do, and her life took the course she herself had set it on. I rarely think of her at all anymore. My legacy, I realize now, isn't the story of a broken family. That was their story, not mine. My legacy is this: It's the sound of my daughter's laughter chasing a butterfly across a field of green grass. It's the quiet strength of my husband's hand in mine, a man who learned the true meaning of allegiance by facing his own deepest flaws. It is the profound, unshakable peace we fought for, bled for, and won together. We weren't given a perfect beginning. Our start was a baptism by fire. So we built our own dawn, from the ashes. That's my story. It wasn't an easy one to tell, but I wanted to share it for anyone out there who has ever been made to feel like they had to choose between their own well-being and a toxic definition of family. My real family is the one I built on a foundation of truth and respect. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and join our community. And in the comments below, I'd be honored if you would share just one thing you've learned about building your own dawn. Thank you for listening.